Welcome to Renegade Inc, the show that allows us to think differently. In British corridors of power, the legacy of empire still lingers. The UK is no longer the global player it pretends to be, but nor is it introspective enough to truly look after its own citizens. This means that the disparity between rich and poor gets greater year on year, but instead of addressing the root causes, the political class scapegoat the vulnerable. We went to Oxford to talk to Professor Danny Dorling, who thinks the British imperial mindset is preventing the UK from becoming a progressive social democracy in a rapidly evolving, multipolar world. When we look at Britain today, there are sort of two scenarios: what the British think about Britain, the UK, and what is the actuality, what's the realistic picture and what's going on the ground. Just give us those two different visions from your point of view.
What the British think about the UK is that this is a very successful country. It's a country that got the second highest number of medals in the Olympic. It's a country that's very proud of itself, that sings triumphant songs, that has a football team that kind of occasionally does all right, whatever, the fifth, sixth largest economy in the world, that kind of thing. The reality of what Britain is it's a country that's on the way down. It's sliding down the ranks faster than any other European country by a number of measures. You can measure it by the size of the economy, because the pound's dropping. You can go from 5th to 6th to 7th largest in the world, and we know what the international statistics will say next year and the year after, because the exchange rate numbers are already in. Or you can measure it by something like life expectancy, which since 2014 has been falling, and is falling nowhere else in Europe. Or you can measure it by the depth of poverty and the extent of poverty, and for Western European country there is nothing else like this. And so the difference between the reality and the message that people are told about the country and their feelings about it is very wide.
What creates that gap?
The change has been quite rapid. We've suddenly gone from, around about 7%, 6% of families with children privately renting, who were mostly doing that before 2010 as a temporary backstop to getting a mortgage, to over a quarter of all families with kids in the country having to have a private landlord, having no security of tenure, not being able to keep their children in the same school if the landlord wants the house, which they want on average every 3 years in London. It's an incredibly fast crisis. Last 10, 15 years, everything has changed and things are falling apart. And I think that's the main reason, the speed of the change, coupled with, of course, the media, who keep on telling the old story.
So the property-owning democracy is what you're saying, that it's fatally flawed?
Well, it's not just fatally flawed. The statistics are truly amazing. The older you now get in Britain, every year that you age, your chances of getting a mortgage actually fall. They don't just go up slightly, they're actually going down. You just have to look around and you see that you couldn't possibly get an average sized house in most of the southeast for most people. And then when we get the good news, and the good news is that house prices are falling in London, the house prices are now falling in Oxford. For the first time in my life, you can go to the estate agent up near Cowley and you can see £10,000 off, £20,000 off, everything in the window. When that happens, people go, oh no, it could crash. And what happens then? And our banks are underwritten on the value of the property. So it's an incredible mess.
The picture you paint is one of a totally capsized economy, which has created a huge amount of cognitive dissonance. Yeah. The things we think are good, high house prices, aren't. No. The immigration and the things that Europe has given us, yes, we think are bad. Yeah. How have we got it so badly wrong? You did touch on the media. Is it solely a media story, or is it a empire hangover?
I mean, you've got to ask, out of 30 odd countries in Europe, how did this particularly large country get into a situation where it complained about getting large numbers of highly skilled, highly fit people coming over here to do work at a low price, which we haven't even educated, and only coming in number to areas that actually where people liked them and voted Remain. And at the same time, as they made the house prices more and more expensive with policies like Help to Buy, which were designed to increase house prices, at the same time not realising that that was simply creating a cliff edge. There's always one country that gets it most wrong. There's always one country which has the highest income inequalities. It happens to be us this time. And then you've got to look at the circumstances and work out, well, why did we get it wrong? And the clue in that has to be something that's different about Britain to every other European country. And what's different about Britain is that we had the world's largest empire just a century ago, and we're still in the hangover from that. And because we ran an empire in a way where we told ourselves lies.
What sort of lies?
We told ourselves that we ran an empire for the good of the world, that the people that we controlled were lucky to have us, that we civilised them. That we did. We told ourselves all these things. When the empire was approaching its height, a man published a book called The Origin of Species. And so at the same time as the British Empire was forming, we learned that we may not simply be put down on here by God, but we're animals. And we learned about ideas like survival of the fittest and so on.
Which ironically was Herbert Spencer, the economist, first coined that phrase, and it was actually picked up by Mr. Darwin.
Yes, it was. But if you're trying to understand the weirdness of the British Empire, having the world's largest ever empire at a time when you have eugenic ideas about superiority.
Right.
And so people 100 years ago wrote about the British race. William Beveridge told the middle class to have 4 children for the good of the race, for the good of the world's people, middle class, not working class. The British middle class should have 4 children, and they could spread them around the world to control them. That's our legacy. We don't teach much about empire now. What we teach is that we invented a spinning jenny. We don't teach about where the cotton came from for that spinning jenny, or who we made buy the material that we wove from that. So we haven't told ourselves our own family story about ourselves. And then when the last colonies go, most of them in the 1970s in Africa, but finally Hong Kong in 1997, and the captive markets go, and the advantage that we had went, and when for the first time in 200 years, we actually have to do something useful ourselves, it's a shock to find out that what we're doing isn't that useful. And then we had a little stay of execution because we released our banks from much control in 1986, and we had a little boom in the banking industry, and that kind of kept us going. But now faith in our banks has gone, and they haven't got any passports.
Right.
They can't operate on the mainland as of the 29th of March. We're in a peculiarly bad situation, and I think it's explainable, understandable from the empire legacy that we've had about our thinking.
And that gap, and not understanding that legacy, it not being taught in schools, being a taboo, if you like, means that we aren't able to properly diagnose what's going wrong and address it.
Yeah. So
what were you left with? You're just left with a load of wishful thinking and good anthems.
Yeah. Good anthems, good songs, wishful thinking, myths, ridiculous stories. People must laugh, when you say, what brilliant British entrepreneurs had there been, you end up coming round to a man who invented a particular kind of vacuum cleaner, which only employed a few dozen people in an obscure small town in the West Country of England. Or you talk about, a man who lives on a Caribbean island who's managed to buy the franchise in a clapped-out old Victorian train system going up to the northwest.
And we hold these people up as the modern-day wealth creators.
Yeah. You just step back and look for a second. When the rest of the world is very nice in not laughing, kind actually, when you look at what could be being said on the mainland of this continent about the British, it could be very cruel. And I think it's remarkable how kind other people in Europe have been about how we behave and what we're doing. And I think it shows a measure of their understanding of history, that they realise that we're in a deep, deep problem, and simply mocking us for our stupidity is not going to help. But one problem is because they don't mock us for our stupidity and say, why don't you learn some history properly? Why don't you actually learn economics the way that much of the rest of the world understands economics works? Because they don't do that.
Then we have mad dogs and Englishmen, and we carry on as we are.
We carry on, and with that, and whenever you hear the real confidence of somebody who's been publicly school educated and utterly believes the rubbish that they're coming out with, then you can see the problem that Britain's got.
If we come to the housing issue as a cornerstone to that problem, because you say, we unleashed the banks from their regulation, big bang, private debt went through the roof. Everyone, instead of going out and doing something useful entrepreneurially, we flogged each other assets that already existed, namely houses, using private debt to do so. Yeah. Is there a moment where there's a housing boss at the moment, Jeff Fairburn, he's been given a £75 million bonus, 60% of the houses or the sales, the transactions for that work were helped by Help to Buy, the government scheme. Is that to crystallise a moment in the UK economic history? Is that a moment, the guy getting that amount of money for that work?
We are at an incredible moment. I mean, Martin Sorrell, who is the head of the largest advertising agency and the highest paid person before him, not many months ago, was required to leave, put it that way. The man you're talking about, on a clip that's gone viral, he was asked about his salary, and he said to the person who'd asked him, the reporter, "I think it's very unfortunate you asked that question."
Persimmon obviously doing well this year, did well last year. That was reflected in your bonus. Do you have any regrets about the furore surrounding that?
I think, yeah.
Sorry. Obviously, the construction of the bricks, follows on from how well Persimmon's doing. So I just thought the two issues were tied together, really. So
I'd rather not talk about that. It's been well covered, actually.
So you don't want to discuss that today? Are there any lessons to be learned from that? It was the biggest bonus in the country. No. Okay, right, fine.
I think that's really unfortunate, actually, that you've done that.
Now, he may have meant he thinks it's very unfortunate for him.
It's a bit more menacing than that.
It was a bit more menacing, yeah, and now it's gone viral.
But don't worry, he's giving some of that to charity.
Oh, isn't that nice? So you can think when you're paying your enormous mortgage for your little box built out of special bricks that they make a bit smaller than normal bricks, so it doesn't look like small. We have the smallest cramped houses in Europe.
Is that right, though, that the bricks are... Because they now have started their own brick factory. Do you know this? And,
No.
And so... But
if you want smaller bricks, you have to have your own brick factory.
Right.
Don't sue me on it, but we know that houses in Britain, including new build houses, are the smallest, lowest quality that we can find in an affluent European country, and at the same time that the price is higher. We know we're building them because of the way we do our building in villages and towns that require a car to be paramount to get around. We're trying to create a kind of hell in the future. We're planning an outer M25 motorway, of which the first leg is between Oxford and Cambridge. Because when Empire 2.0 comes after Brexit and it's so successful, we're going to need an outer M25 because of the economy. And they're planning this. We're living in the most remarkable time. I'm not a sensationalist. I've been added up numbers, for 30 years. I'm a boring social statistician. And it used to be really hard. It used to be very complicated. You just had to work out these relative differences in rates, and then I would complain about New Labour because although the North was doing better, the South was doing even better, so some kind of gap. It's really easy now. More babies died last year than the year before, and more babies died the year before than the year before that, and it's a higher infant mortality rate, and nowhere else in Europe are more babies dying. Last winter, 130,000 children in B&B accommodation, higher than any other winter. So the question is, this winter, 140, 150, 160,000, what's it going to be? The number of homeless people dying on the streets per year, rate increases 8-fold in 4 years. This is what a disaster looks like.
Welcome back to Renegade Inc. Before we hear more from Professor Danny Dorling on Britain's Imperial hangover, we'd like to make his book, Peak Inequality, our book of the week. In this tome, Dorling uses data to support his compelling argument so we can see through the political and media spin. We can't recommend it highly enough. It would be impossible to talk about inequality in the UK without mentioning one of the biggest disasters in recent British history. London is one of the richest cities on the planet, yet in one of the richest boroughs, Kensington and Chelsea, a tragedy unfolded that laid bare the stark contrast between the haves and the have-nots, and that was the Grenfell Tower tragedy.
Our people are dying! Their dead bodies charred in the building. Went on my knees and cried because I could not imagine what it would be like to see your child behind a glass screaming for help. These people need to go to jail, and it needs to happen now.
The £2 difference between the Reno Bond material, which is fire retardant, and the Reno Bond material that isn't fire retardant. That's a £2 difference. Now you're telling me that a £5 saving or a 10 grand saving in materials is worth it. All they did was spend money on making the outside look nice. They cut corners, they cut corners, they cut corners, and they pocket the difference.
Those people that died in that fire didn't have to die. They'd have put safety things in, they'd have put sprinklers in, they'd have let the lift work, and they'd have saved the work. They'd have saved some of them, not let all them people die, and them babies and everything else.
At 2:41, we received a call from my sister, who sent her voice message saying, "Hello Nabil, there is a fire in our building. We are sitting in our flat. Okay, bye."
Justice! Now! What do you want? Justice! When do you want it?
I feel like similar social issues are happening throughout our city. I feel like in first world countries we have an assumption that it's going to be better because we have procedures in place, but then you have to see who's policing these procedures, who's managing the people who are managing us, and there's no accountability for them.
I've worked for a housing association before, and I walked away from that work. I loved my tenants and I loved what I did, but I couldn't deal with the fear of things like this. I would go on state inspections every 6 weeks, reporting the same thing, and nothing's happening. We must be heard, and we must use this opportunity right now to make sure that the story does not die.
In that first half, you paint a realistic but really bleak picture, and it's one that's based on a lack of self-awareness of the British psyche, the way the British view themselves. And the cornerstone of a lot of it is the housing market and a banking system that's failed and now untrustworthy and out of control. But the other bit central to it is the inequality gap. I mean, it's incredible, the inequality. You've said peak inequality. How do we get there?
We got there by inequality levels, the wage gap between people and wages and benefit gap, increasing relentlessly from around about 1977 onwards with almost no halt. Around about 1990, equalities appeared to increase amongst the bottom 90%, but the top 10% still carried on getting more. And then around about, 2012, I think, the rest of the top 10% stopped getting more, but the 1% carried on getting more because we ran out of money. Around about 2015, most of the 1% saw their wages drop, particularly after Brexit, because you don't need to pay bankers more to keep them in Britain when you're trying to get them to move to Dublin and Paris and Frankfurt. So that's how it did it. It went on and on and on. You can't see on these graphs that I draw New Labour being elected. It made no difference to the inequality rise. It's an incredible situation to end in.
And the factors have been?
The factors have been losing well-paid industrial jobs that on average would pay twice the real wage of a cleaning job, what's called an unskilled job, although they're often very skilled. Increased greed at the top, caused by reducing top tax rates. Once you reduce the top tax rate to 40%, 45%, the incentive of greedy people to try and get more, because they can keep most of it, is really high. And emphasis on talent and skill. So we began to describe some jobs as being very, very talented when we just pay people more. So it's creating these myths of super talent. So somebody who provides 400 meals for children within half an hour, including halal and vegetarian, and makes it all hot, that's an unskilled job. Whereas somebody who sits at a trading desk pressing some buttons that they've been taught to and saying the right words and dressing up in the right way, they're brilliant and they're worth 300, 400, £1 million a year.
When we talk about individual potential, how has this mass of inequality, peak inequality, impacted on personal potential? Because that brings it back to the individual, and it isn't just a headline on a billboard or on a TV screen, which is so distant from man on the street.
For your average individual in Britain, they are living in a country that is much, much poorer than the GDP rate would suggest, because about 40% of the income is taken by the top 10%. So for 90% of people, you're living in a country that is has almost half as much as it is officially said to have. It's a society which hasn't not been this divided for, getting on for a century. And it means that we do not understand each other. And people at the top think they absolutely have to have the things they have and more of them, which is one reason why people at the very top have funded a Brexit campaign, because they see it as a way of getting Britain offshore and not being controlled by taxation of Europeans and not being made to behave in a civilised way where you respect each other that is common on the mainland. The only way you can disguise inequality as a problem as it grows bigger and bigger and bigger is you've got to give people another enemy to look at rather than the people who are taking most. And the most convenient enemy we've had has been immigrants. Immigrants have been used right through from the 1970s onwards as the reason your schools are not good, it's because the immigrants are using them. The reason you can't get a house is because the immigrants are getting all the houses. The reason your job pays lowly is some immigrant has got that better job that you would have. And it's an incredibly convenient myth to sell. The only problem is, if 52% of people vote leave, you suddenly can't use that argument anymore. 100,000 people don't turn up and things don't get better. And if you've been told for 30 years, if they didn't come, things will get better, and they stop coming and things don't get better. Now, tabloid newspapers will blame the immigrants for not coming, and it's still an immigrant problem.
Gosh, what are the tabloids going to run with next? Have you thought about it?
Traitors, enemies of the people, those who don't believe, who are not patriotic, who are not British enough, cynics, hippies, socialists. That's the next. We're heading for an incredibly ugly period, because the people who like inequality, who think some people should have much more than others, truly believe that is the right way. And they're willing to do anything to protect what they think is important.
How do you get to the argument that inequality is good?
Because it rewards top talent and is market efficient, and it helps the potential wealth creators create more wealth, which will eventually trickle down to the masses.
But if you follow the logic of that argument, it doesn't take you very long to get to eugenics.
Toby Young was one of 11 or 12 authors of a paper published a few months ago, which said that children who are in selective private and grammar schools in Britain have genes which mean they're cleverer and they should be in their schools. And it came out in the Times that the same kind of study is now suggesting that the children who get to our universities are from the alpha stream genes. There's a belief that people got their millions because they had cleverer genes. Their children will inherit their clever genes, but because their children have got clever genes, they need to send them to a school that may cost £40,000 or £50,000 a year, because it's only fair to nurture those clever genes in their children. And most people are lazy and feckless and need to be controlled and are not to be trusted. And that belief is a common belief of people with a lot of money at the top of society, and it helps them get through the day.
How do we begin to reverse or begin reversing these pernicious messages, the endemic inequality, a housing market that's totally broken? How do you begin
to do it?
And also, dare I say, start a renaissance?
Yeah.
Because we actually need a whole new thinking here.
There are lots of people doing it. The most effective group, absolutely fascinating in the last 2 years since Brexit, are black British journalists. It is stunning to see how often journalists who are not white, writing in, often not tabloid papers, are saying this is a problem because you're a colonial country, this isn't right. And that is the most concentrated set of thinking I've seen outside of academia. I mean, in academia we kind of have, young academics who but they use such complicated language the message doesn't get out.
Right.
I can see a lot of signs for hope. I see a diminishing and small group of young people who believe in inequality is good and they are particularly special. You look at times when things got better before. The last time inequality peaked was 1913.
Right.
And then equality rose all the way through the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. Economic disasters, in that case a war which was only supposed to last a few weeks, lasting 4 or 5 years, followed by another war, just so that you knew that your elite were incompetent. That kind of thing ushers in change amongst the young generation. Brexit is a very small version of that. If you're worrying about Brexit and say Brexit's terrible, look at the history of countries, and when inequalities rise and fall, you often need something to go badly wrong at the peak of inequality to help people realise that those people in charge, you've got to remember the people in charge have been stoking this thing up. It doesn't happen by accident. The people in charge are not competent. And then it's easier for a younger generation, particularly a younger generation who've been given massive debt, who cannot start a family because there's nowhere they can live, who've been treated this badly, and especially if you've managed to spread it across 98% of them. That's the kind of circumstances in which people realise that they have to work together to make things better, rather than individually try to look after themselves and get more than everybody else. For instance, let's be fantasists. Let's create the largest social movement in Europe of 500,000 people. Right. And have meetings around the country where you talk about what you could do, and have local councils being controlled by people who actually believe in this kind of thing, and have MPs standing for the idea that this is the right way to do. I mean, that's all happening now. We had the largest, fastest swing in recorded polling history in May and June of 2017. Maybe I look for this. I'm a glass half full person. But I also measure things. And I can tell you it's a bigger swing than 1945, because 1945 occurred over 10 years, not just 2.
So that undercurrent must give you hope.
Yeah, and well, also, to be very cynical, whenever you're making predictions, whenever something's at an extreme, whichever country in Europe is top out of 30, almost always it isn't in 5 years later, because the effort it takes, the effort it takes to be ridiculously stupid, it cannot be sustained forever. If you were trying to reduce the income and wealth of the best off people in Britain, in a way you couldn't go about it better than we're doing now. The price of luxury apartments in London is really tumbling. Why would an overseas investor buy a flat for 3 or 4 million in London when the pound's dropping, Brexit is occurring, and there's a chance of an election of a government who will bang on a property tax that will make you painful? Yes. The opportunity at the moment to move more in the right direction and to set the pace so that that is the way you go year after year after year, that the Conservative Party, or what's left of the Conservative Party, each year moves a little bit to the left. They already have been. They've increased the taxes on landlords. They've got rid of the caps on housing for local authorities. They've done things that you'd never imagine them doing. Labour slowly moves more and more to the left to eventually end up where a normal social democratic party in Europe might be. You know, that's all we're trying to do, is become normal. This isn't about some revolution or, becoming Scandinavian. When you're at the bottom of the class, you don't go, okay, let's set a target of being at the top of the class. You set a target of being in the middle. And it's going to take 30 years to get to the middle. And those 30 years, if we manage it, will feel like an incredible speed of change. We'll be faster than the 1960s in terms of social mores changing and the kind of respect you used to have for the upper class being reduced. And that's just to become an average European country in terms of how we treat one another.
Danny Dorling, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.